Alexander Reed sat behind his massive glass desk, the evening light casting long shadows across his sleek office. Files and resumes were spread out in front of him. All the same, impressive credentials, rehearsed answers, and safe ambition. He was bored until he found it. An application with a cover letter that made him pause. I don't believe in playing it safe. I believe in bringing new ideas, challenging outdated methods, and working hard to achieve real results. If you're looking for someone who blends in, I'm not your guy. But if you're looking for someone who believes in shaking things up for the better, I hope to hear from you. The signature read, Nathaniel Carter. Attached was a photo, a young man with sharp hazel eyes and an almost defiant tilt to his chin. The image struck Alexander harder than he cared to admit. His fingers brushed over the picture before he realized what he was doing. He cleared his throat and sat back. He's fearless, Alexander thought, a small smile curving his lips. I want him here. Nate Carter stepped into the gleaming lobby of Reed Corp., his heart pounding but his face perfectly composed. His charcoal gray suit was crisp, and his messenger bag hung confidently over one shoulder. He wasn't about to let nerves show. Welcome to Reed Corp., the receptionist greeted him with a smile. You're expected in the conference room on the 15th floor? Nate nodded. Thank you. As he rode the elevator up, he reminded himself of his goal. Prove himself, learn quickly, and never let anyone walk over him. But his resolve was tested sooner than he expected. The moment he reached his desk, 5 senior colleagues surrounded him with false smiles. Welcome, newbie, one of them, Brad, said. He dropped a thick file on Nate's desk. We figured you could help out since, you're new. One by one, they dumped their work on his desk and smirked. Consider it part of the initiation. Another sneered before they turned and left for the day, laughing. Nate clenched his jaw, his hazel eyes flashing with anger. He glanced at the towering stacks of files. His first instinct was to stay late and prove he could handle it. But no, he wasn't going to let bullies get away with it. With a steadying breath, he neatly stacked their work aside and focused only on his assigned task. Nate walked into the office that morning with an air of calm confidence. He had barely slept, running over his decision again and again. But every time he thought of those 5 smug faces leaving him with their work, his resolve hardened. He wasn't going to be anyone's pushover. The moment he reached his desk, he gathered the neatly stacked files that weren't his and tucked them under his arm. With his own completed assignment in hand, he strode toward the director's office. The door to Mr. Henry Lewis's office was slightly ajar. Nate knocked firmly. Come in, Henry called. Nate stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The director, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up from his computer. Carter, isn't it? Henry asked, glancing at his watch. What can I do for you? Good morning, Mr. Lewis, Nate said, keeping his voice even. He placed his own assignment on the desk. This is the work that was assigned to me. And these, he carefully laid down the other 5 stacks of files next to it, are tasks that 5 of my senior colleagues decided I should handle for them. Henry's brow furrowed, and he leaned forward, flipping through the piles. His frown deepened as he recognized the projects. He glanced up sharply. They gave you this work? Yes, sir, Nate said, his jaw tight. They told me it was part of my initiation. I wanted to be clear that I'm here to contribute, not to be a dumping ground for other people's responsibilities. Henry's face darkened, his eyes glinting with irritation. Who are they? Nate's voice was steady. Brad Connors, Jacob Lynn, Melissa Ward, Derek Hughes, and Carla Grant. Henry's mouth tightened into a thin line. He picked up his phone. Stay here. Nate stood silently as Henry made a curt phone call, summoning the 5 senior employees to his office immediately. Less than 5 minutes later, the door burst open, and Brad led the group in, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. You called Mr. Lewis? Brad asked, his usual cocky grin plastered on his face. Yes, I did, Henry said, his tone cold. He gestured to the stacks of files on his desk. Do these look familiar to you? Brad's eyes darted to the files, and his grin faltered. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, Melissa crossed her arms, and Derek and Carla exchanged worried glances. Those are ours, Melissa admitted, her voice hesitant. Henry's gaze hardened. Then why were they on Carter's desk? Silence filled the room. Brad's jaw worked as if trying to come up with an excuse. "We thought he could use the experience," Jacob finally said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Get a feel for the workload." Henry's eyes narrowed. "Experience? From doing your work while you leave early? Don't insult my intelligence. This is unprofessional, disrespectful, and frankly pathetic." He jabbed a finger toward them. "You've been here long enough to know better." Melissa's face flushed. "We didn't mean—" "No," Henry snapped. "You didn't mean to take advantage of a new recruit. If this is how you treat your colleagues, you don't deserve to be on my team." He took a deep breath, his voice low and dangerous. "This is a formal warning. One more stunt like this, and you're out. Understood?" They all nodded, their eyes downcast. "Get out of my office," Henry growled. As they turned to leave, their humiliation was palpable. Brad's face was red with suppressed rage, and he glared at Nate as he passed by. Outside the director's office, the five of them clustered around Nate. Brad stepped forward, his voice low and venomous. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Brad sneered, running to the boss like a little tattletale. Nate didn't flinch. He met Brad's glare head-on, his hazel eyes blazing. "No, I think I'm someone who knows the difference between being a team player and being a doormat. Maybe you should learn that." Jacob let out a bitter laugh. "You're going to regret this, newbie." Nate took a step closer, his voice firm. "Listen carefully. I'm not here to do your job. I don't care how long you've been here or what games you're used to playing. If you try to dump your work on me again, I won't just take it to Mr. Lewis. I'll take it to Mr. Reed himself." Their faces blanched at the mention of the CEO. "You wouldn't dare," Melissa muttered. Nate's smile was sharp. "Try me?" They stood there, stunned into silence, as Nate walked away, his shoulders squared and his head held high. Up on the second floor, just beyond the balcony railing, Alexander Reed had watched everything unfold. His eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and admiration as Nate walked away, unshaken. The corner of his mouth lifted into a smile. He's more than just bold, Alexander thought. He's fearless, and that made him fall for Nate just a little bit more. Nate had been at Reed Enterprises for 2 weeks now, and while the air in the office was less overtly hostile, the undercurrents of tension were undeniable. The confrontation with Brad and his crew had spread through the company like wildfire. Whispers and glances followed him wherever he went, but Nate refused to let it bother him. He focused on his work, determined to prove that he was there on merit, not just making a statement. And so far, he was doing just that. Monday morning, Nate sat at his desk, typing up a report with rapid efficiency. His fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes scanning the document as he double-checked each detail. He was so absorbed in his work that he barely noticed the sound of footsteps stopping next to his desk. A low, familiar voice snapped him out of his focus. "Morning, Nate." He glanced up to see Brad Connors, leaning against his desk with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, Jacob and Melissa lingered, their expressions neutral, but their body language radiated resentment. "Brad," Nate said curtly, his hands pausing on the keyboard. "What do you want?" Brad's smile tightened. "Look, we got off on the wrong foot. Let's bury the hatchet." Nate leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Oh, and why's that?" Jacob interjected, his voice deceptively casual. "It's not good to have bad blood with your colleagues, Nate. We're all in this together." Nate's eyes narrowed. "We're colleagues, not a high school clique. If you're here to play nice just to save face, don't bother. I'm not interested in your office politics." Brad's jaw twitched. "Don't be so quick to burn bridges, newbie. You might need us one day." Nate's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "If I need help, I'll ask the people who actually do their work. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real work to do." Melissa let out a huff of irritation. "You think you're better than us?" "No," Nate said calmly. "I just think I'm better than being walked over." Brad's eyes darkened, but before he could say anything, a smooth, authoritative voice broke through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Everyone turned abruptly. Standing a few feet away was Alexander Reed, the CEO himself. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit that fit him like a second skin, Alexander exuded an effortless authority. His dark eyes swept over the group, lingering on Nate for a fraction longer than the others. Brad straightened up, his fake smile back in place. "No problem at all, Mr. Reed. Just talking with our newest colleague." Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "I hope that's all it was. I expect professionalism from everyone on this floor." His tone was polite but edged with steel. "If there are issues, they will be addressed through the proper channels." "Yes, sir," Brad mumbled, his bravado fading. "Good," Alexander said smoothly. "You're dismissed." Brad and his crew retreated, shooting Nate one last glare before disappearing down the hallway. The air felt noticeably clearer once they were gone. Nate exhaled, glancing up at Alexander. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, but I could have handled that." Alexander's lips twitched into a barely there smile. "I have no doubt you could have, Nate." He paused, his eyes glinting. "But sometimes it's easier to extinguish sparks before they become a fire." Nate chuckled softly. "Fair enough." Alexander's gaze softened. "I admire your tenacity. You're doing excellent work here. Keep it up." Nate's cheeks warmed slightly at the praise. "Thank you, sir." Alexander nodded, his eyes lingering on Nate's for a moment longer than necessary before he turned and walked away, leaving behind the subtle scent of his cologne, a blend of cedarwood and something unmistakably him. Nate sat back down, his heart pounding a little harder than it should have. He shook his head, muttering to himself, "Get a grip, Carter." Later that afternoon, as Nate sifted through his emails, one subject line caught his attention. "Exclusive networking event. Invitation from the CEO." He blinked, wondering if it was a mistake. He clicked the email open. "Dear Nate Carter, I'd like to personally invite you to a private networking event this Friday evening. It will be an opportunity to meet key figures in the company and beyond. Your recent contributions and work ethic have not gone unnoticed. Looking forward to seeing you there. Best regards, Alexander Reed, CEO, Reed Enterprises." Nate stared at the screen, his thoughts a swirl of confusion and curiosity. This wasn't something that typically happened to new employees. Was this just a professional gesture? Or was there something more? He chewed on his bottom lip, a habit he'd had since childhood, then sat back with a sigh. Whatever it was, he'd face it head on. In his private office, Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching Nate's reaction through the glass wall that overlooked the main office floor. The way Nate's brows furrowed as he read the email, the way he nibbled his lip in thought, it was all utterly fascinating. Alexander allowed himself a small smile. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. He only knew that from the moment he'd seen Nate's application photo, something in him had shifted. And now, watching Nate navigate the challenges with a blend of fire and integrity, Alexander felt his intrigue deepen. It was dangerous territory, mixing business with personal feelings, but Alexander was willing to tread carefully. After all, some risks were worth taking. 6 months later, the office buzzed with its usual energy. The sound of keyboards clicking, phones ringing, and quiet chatter filling the air. But there was an unmistakable undercurrent of excitement today, a subtle anticipation shared among the employees of Reed Enterprises. In his corner of the open-plan office, Nate Carter focused on his work, fingers flying over the keyboard as he finished up a report. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind: promotions, recognition, and finally finding his place in the company. But beyond all that, the most unexpected and rewarding part was the relationship that had quietly grown into something solid, something real. He felt a familiar presence approach before he even looked up. "Carter," came the deep, smooth voice that sent shivers down his spine. "Got a minute?" Nate smirked, not even glancing up. "For you, Mr. Reed?" "Always." A soft chuckle followed, and Alexander Reed, CEO and the man who had completely stolen Nate's heart, leaned against Nate's desk. Alexander's eyes sparkled with amusement, but there was a warmth there, one reserved solely for Nate. The office had long since picked up on their dynamic. There were no official announcements, no grand declarations, but it didn't take a genius to notice the way Alexander's gaze softened when it landed on Nate, or how Nate's shoulders relaxed whenever Alexander was near. Nate saved his work and finally looked up, taking in Alexander's perfectly tailored navy suit, his dark hair immaculately styled, and those penetrating eyes that still made his heart skip a beat. What can I do for you? Nate teased. Alexander leaned in slightly, his voice low and intimate. Actually, it's what I can do for you. Lunch? Nate raised an eyebrow. You? Taking a break for lunch? Must be a special occasion. Alexander's lips curved into that rare, heart-stopping smile. It is. 6 months, remember? Nate blinked, his heart fluttering. He hadn't forgotten, but hearing Alexander acknowledge it so casually made it feel all the more real. 6 months, Nate repeated softly. Yeah, let's celebrate. Alexander's eyes gleamed. Good. Meet me in my office in 5 minutes. Nate nodded, feeling warmth spread through his chest. As Alexander turned to leave, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. Oh, and Carter? Alexander's voice carried just enough for a few nearby colleagues to hear. Don't keep me waiting. Nate laughed, shaking his head. Wouldn't dream of it, Mr. Reed. 5 minutes later, Nate stepped into Alexander's spacious office. The door clicked shut behind him, and the noise of the bustling office faded away. The sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the polished hardwood floor. Alexander was standing by his desk, his tie now loosened, his jacket draped over a chair. The sight was effortlessly intimate, and Nate's breath caught. You know, Nate said, stepping closer, for a CEO, you're pretty good at remembering anniversaries. Alexander smirked. I told you, I don't forget things that matter. Nate closed the distance between them. So, I matter? Alexander's gaze softened, his hand reaching up to cup Nate's cheek. You always have. The words sent a rush of warmth through Nate, and before he could reply, Alexander's lips claimed his. The kiss was slow, deliberate, filled with all the unspoken emotions they'd both held back for too long. Nate melted into it, his hand sliding up to rest on Alexander's chest. The steady beat of Alexander's heart beneath his fingertips was grounding, reassuring. This was real. They were real. When they finally pulled back, Alexander rested his forehead against Nate's. I love you. Nate's breath hitched, a smile spreading across his face. I love you too. They walked back to the office floor together after lunch, Alexander's hand brushing lightly against Nate's. The second they appeared, conversations halted, eyes flicking to the two of them before darting away. Nate smirked. I think they know. Alexander chuckled. Good. Makes things simpler. As they passed Brad's desk, Nate gave him a pointed smile. Brad, who'd been watching with thinly veiled resentment, quickly looked away, suddenly fascinated by his computer screen. Nate leaned closer to Alexander. That never gets old. Alexander's eyes twinkled. Let them talk. All that matters is you and me. A wave of warmth washed over Nate. He glanced around at the curious glances, the whispers, and he found that he didn't care. The uncertainty, the hesitation, all of that was gone now. He had a place here, and he had Alexander by his side. They shared one final, knowing smile before parting ways to their respective tasks. The office buzzed around them, but for Nate, everything else faded into the background. He was exactly where he was meant to be,